My guest today is Shimshon Chaddock, who is in Tauranga, New Zealand. He's a Jewish man who believes in Yeshua as Messiah, and Shimshon and his wife Heather are dear friends of ours. Welcome, Shimshon, to Bendigo via radio.
Shalom, Ruth. Good day, Bendigo. It's good to be with you. Bendigo, you have a very special place in my heart, and if I actually had the opportunity to share how I found out that Bendigo exists, some of you might turn the dial off right now or might want to tune in for more.
Maybe we'll do an interview just on that one time. Shimshon, it's just a delight having you with us. And as people listen to you, they hear not a Kiwi accent, but an American accent. And you've lived in 3 countries. So would you like to tell us the countries apart from New Zealand where you are now?
Well, my accent has changed over the years. Growing up with my father's family from Russia and my mother's family from Scotland, so there was a range of accents in my house, but I was born in the United States. And some of you will say, he's American. And I would say, no, I am a Jew that is born in America. And there's a big difference because if you look through history, Jews is not a religion. It's confusing. People think it's a religion, but it's actually nationality. And in all the nations that we've been to, that we thought we were citizens, that we thought we were welcome, we've been kicked out of every one. So I am a Jew that was born in America. I have American descent. I'm stuck with a terrible American accent. But besides America, I lived in Israel, and now I live in New Zealand.
So it's a very rich heritage you have, very rich indeed. So you mentioned then about being a Jew it's who you are. It's not just where you're born. It's your total heritage. So what was life like for Shimshon as a Jewish boy, teenager, young man growing up in the United States?
Well, to be honest, Judaism had really no part in my life except that we were Jewish.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have the typical Jewish upbringing when people think of Jews as doctors and lawyers. My father was very tough guy, was involved. He was a businessman, but involved with a lot of illegal business and very, I don't know how to word it without causing problems, but people of ill repute, will put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
So to grow up being Jewish meant to me just that I was different than everybody, because I lived mostly around Italians and Irish. And, at 9 years old, I had actually been accused of killing Jesus because I wasn't a Catholic.
Wow, no, that's really an important point, isn't it, for Jewish people? How did that feel?
It was confusing. I was 9 years old. We had just moved from New York to New Jersey, a shy kid who did not want to move away from the only home that I knew. Literally had to be put in the car and carried away because I did not want to leave. And my first day at school, they said to me, "Are you Italian?" I said, "No." "Are you Irish?" I said, "No." "Are you Catholic?" "No." "What are you?" "I'm Jewish." "You're dead at the end of the day." So my first day, they actually ganged up and waited outside for me after my first day. So a shy kid in a new school in a new state, and waiting for the whole classroom, the whole school was outside waiting. And I guess I lived up to my name of Shimshon Samson and was able to beat them up, and things went on happily after that.
That's something we see, unfortunately, rising so much. And for those on radio, you can't see Shimshon, but he's a solid bodybuilder type frame, so he'd be able to give him one back. But for Jewish people, that's a very common experience, isn't it?
Sadly, yes, it is. More so in different regions, because there's Jews in many different countries, but people are so ignorant to who Jesus was.
Yeah.
And that they blame everything on the Jewish people.
It's so sad. So, obviously, you said you didn't grow up in a religious home. So, did the God of Israel or religion play any role at all for you? What was life like for you? What sort of things did you do?
Well, as a worldly kid in a worldly family, we did keep some Jewish feasts,
Mm-hmm.
which later I found out were not really Jewish feasts. They're actually God's feasts.
Yeah.
But we were able to keep Hanukkah or Passover until I was about 9 or 10, and my grandparents moved away. So when my grandparents moved away, a little bit of Judaism that we had left with them. But we celebrated Christmas, we celebrated Easter, we celebrated this. So there really was no religion. But there's something I have been able to look back in my life that I used to sit outside and talk to God. And until I was about 12 years old. Now, did I talk to Jesus? Did I talk to the God of Israel? Or was it just God? I don't remember. But I remember talking to him. But due to my parents, ill-timed and very violent divorce, whatever was open in my heart shut down. I did go to Catholic church as a kid because my friends all went and I had nothing to do on Sundays. And then at 13, I got I got kind of dragged to a Protestant or Presbyterian youth group, Sunday school. And I sat outside. I didn't want to go in. And the teacher came out and brought me in. And I had a good time. And there was a cute girl there. So I went for a while, probably due to the cute girl. So I was eating seeds and did not know it at the time, but religion had no part. And once my parents were divorced, my heart was cold to anything of God.
It's so did you find a conflict going into that Catholic church as a Jewish young man?
It's hard to remember, to be honest, but I know at one point I actually it's kind of funny, but I almost converted to Catholicism, not because I was drawn to Jesus or Mary or any of those, but everybody in my life around me was Catholic. I knew more about being a Catholic than I did about being a Jew. But when they would take communion, I wanted that wafer. And they told me if I'd take that wafer, I'd go to hell because I wasn't a Catholic. So I was going to convert. And my Jewish grandmother put her foot down and said, not my grandchild.
That's interesting. So she still had an influence even though they weren't living near you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I'm grateful for that.
Yeah. So she continued to place some, what we'd say, Jewish heritage into you.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Jews don't marry foreign wives and all those type of things. Of course, most of everybody in my family as Jews are married to Gentiles. So I don't know how much we actually listened to her, but there were some seeds that were imparted to us.
Yeah. This background that I'm talking with Shimshon Chaddock is important because in a moment we're going to go a little deeper in an amazing encounter that Shimshon had. But just before we go to that, Shimshon, anything else you'd like to say about this part of your life that really is important to understand what a big transformation occurred for you?
It's only with hindsight that I could look back and see, because obviously my testimony and how long it actually is, and all the things that I incurred and went through and brought upon myself. But I could look back and see that God was always with me, though he felt so far away. Though I had turned my heart away from him as a young child who actually reached out to him. Again, I don't know if it was Jesus, but I didn't have a problem believing in Jesus because it was spoken around me so much. But my heart went dead. But yet I can see his hand on my life all the way through. And now coming up on 58 years old, there's a lot of history there.
Yeah, that's just wonderful. I'm talking today with Shimshon Chaddock, and he's in Tauranga, New Zealand. So we have an international guest today. So today I'm talking with our good friend Shimshon Chaddock, who's in New Zealand. And we've just spoken with Shimshon about growing up as a Jewish young man in America. Shimshon, how did you, as a young man, view Jesus? As a Jewish person, how did you see Jesus?
Well, just quickly, you asked about how it is to be a Jew and with Jesus. And, because of my name, like my name cannot even be pronounced correctly by people. So my name is actually not Shimshon Chaddock, it's Shimshon Chaddock, which is the name righteous, a descendant of Zadok. So there's still things that I have to put up with or deal with or allow people space, with pronunciations and things because of, as we know, different languages, different cultures are difficult. So I have to lay down that part of the culture that I even have to go by a different name at times. So for me, my opinion of Jesus or any thought that I had on Jesus, I remember being in school thinking that Jesus was born a Jew, but he converted to Catholicism at some point.
Wow.
My whole picture of him was a Catholic. We did not talk about him. Again, if I wasn't in a religious family, so there was no anti-missionary talk in my family. We didn't have those discussions. I knew him simply as a Catholic, as a statue, as, the Catholics with the cross.
Yep.
He was a Catholic to me, 100%. If I was going to speak to somebody and with any religious questions, I would have gone to a priest before I would have gone to a rabbi.
Wow.
Because that's my whole understanding of who he is.
Yeah, that whole mindset thing is a really interesting thing, isn't it? But Shimshon, what I really want our listeners to hear today is your amazing encounter with Yeshua, as we call him in Hebrew, because that is a powerful story. So what happened to change your mind about him?
Well, Ruth, this is more or less a 3-hour story, but we'll cut it down to the 30-second bit that we have. And hopefully this will bless you and it will encourage you. 32 years ago. It was 32 years ago. Well, it actually began with supernatural experiences that I had, beginning from my teenage years. When I was 20 years old, I explained that I did not have the traditional Jewish upbringing. My father owned nightclubs. He owned strip clubs. At 20 years old, I wasn't old enough to drink, and I was managing strip clubs. I was carrying weapons. I was getting into gunfights. And the first time I heard God speak was when 2 bikers came and did a drive-by shooting, and they tried to kill me. And it was about 3 a.m. The car went by, and I saw 3 flashes. And I was drunk, and I was stoned. So your thoughts are not exactly clear. Your reactions aren't clear. But I saw those 3 flashes, and in that moment, I heard a voice yell into my head saying, "The speed of light is faster than the speed of sound. That's a gunshot. Hit the ground." And I had a moment to process that, and I threw myself down into the ground. And when I did, 3 bullets went into the wall. Now, people that I was outside with, in the natural, I went down so fast that they thought I was dead, and they yelled out, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yes," and it became a huge gunfight. A couple years later, I was working construction because I had to get out of that whole lifestyle of blood, sex, drugs. Blood, when I mean by blood, I mean by fighting and breaking of bones and things. And I was working construction, and I was standing under a wall, and all of a sudden, my body filled with electricity, and I saw and felt this giant hand grab me. And next thing I knew, I flew like 3 meters in the air, landed on my bum. And when I did, that wall collapsed. I would have been crushed and killed underneath it. Now, I knew that was God, but I did not know what to do with it. And years went by, and I got arrested for international drug smuggling and was supposed to go to jail for 10 years. And miraculous story of how I was released from that. But it got to be when I was 25, one night I was home alone, and I lived with a band, and I was never in my house alone. And I was watching TV, and I was looking for a movie, and all of a sudden I came to a show with Jimmy Swaggart speaking. And if anybody remembers Jimmy Swaggart, this old country preacher, and I hated this guy. I thought he was a hypocrite. I hated his accent. I hated his handkerchief. I couldn't stand the guy. Nothing I liked about him. But I was watching, and I was like, wait, what am I watching? And I can't watch this. And I changed the channel, and this power came over me. And it made me go back to the channel. Well, this happened 3 times. And at the last time I yelled out, God, if that's you, I will listen, but I will not watch. And then Jesus appeared in my room. And I looked at him. And this wasn't a drug-induced vision or anything. This was real. Now, he appeared in my room, but it still shocks me to this day that there was no fear within me. There was no reverence for the Almighty, which I don't understand. But I just looked at him and I said, I can't believe in you. I'm a Jew. You're a Catholic. He said, oh, no. I am a Jew like you, but I am the King of the Jews. And he disappeared. And from that moment, my life began to change. I started to seek him. I would do drugs all night and read the Bible all night, but that was the moment my life began to change.
Wow. I mean, that's for most of our listeners, this is just a very powerful encounter with the Lord that most Christians don't get to have. It's interesting you say that you read the Bible all night and did drugs all night. It's almost a contradiction, isn't it?
Many of the people I was selling drugs to, because I was saying, I'm a born-again Christian. Look at me. And selling them cocaine at that time. And they would say, that's sacrilegious. You can't read the Bible and do cocaine. And I'd say, watch me. I'm learning. Well, thank God some of those people are still alive 32 years later. And even though I live on the other side of the world, they contact me to speak to their children or to help reconcile their marriages and things.
So how did you get free of the drugs and how long did it take? Because it's obviously a process to be transformed after encountering with Yeshua.
Well, it was almost 3 years to the day from that moment. Because I had got baptized, but there was no conviction in my life. I didn't know what was right, what was wrong. But the more I kept doing drugs and sleeping with women and doing the things that I shouldn't, what once made me feel like a king or Tarzan, king of the jungle, I would wake up feeling filthy and dirty from the inside, and I couldn't get the stench of death off of me and the uncleanness. But within 3 years, I was stripped of everything. I had no car. I had no job. I had no place to live. I lost everything. I had nothing. And one night, I got down on my knees. I just got fired from the best job I'd ever had. And I was living with people who were about to be evicted. And I got down on my knees and I cried for the first time since I was a little child because I wasn't allowed to cry at home. I came home once crying. My father slapped because I got beaten up by an older boy. And he slapped me and he said, if you ever come home crying, I'll give you a reason to cry. So I didn't cry. I cried if an animal died. I cried if I watched a chick flick, movie, but I never cried in real life. And that night I cried and I said, Jesus, I know you, but I don't know your way. And if you give me a car, a job, a place to live, and a church, I will give you my life. And I curled up like a baby and cried myself to sleep. And within 1 month, every one of those things were answered. And I gave him everything, and I was cleansed from drugs just like that. And I've been following him now for 29 and a half years.
Wow. Praise the Lord. I mean, that's all, your only response, isn't it, that you can really give, that God is so good. There's so many lessons for others in what you've just shared there about, especially for those that are struggling with drugs or other lifestyle things that are in conflict with the Christian walk. What advice would you give to anybody listening that is in that space today?
If anybody knows me, I'm very real. I don't sugarcoat things. I love people. I love to laugh. I love to joke. Try to have a great sense of humor about things. But the one thing I will promise is surrendering your life to Jesus, to Yeshua, is the hardest thing you'll ever do. Trusting him is the hardest thing you will ever do. You think drugs or getting off alcohol is hard? Trusting the Lord at times can be hard because you're handing over the reins of your life to an unseen God, though he is right next to us, though he's carrying us through those things. How anybody gets through it without him, I have no idea. But I know there's programs like NA or AA that work for many people, but their mantra is that you're always going to be a drug addict and you're always going to be an alcoholic. But Jesus' word says, if you believe in me, you are a new creation. You are made new. And I chose to believe Jesus' words. And that all the addictions went away. I tried to go to NA and I tried to go to AA. And actually, I ran out of those meetings and bought drugs and went and got drunk because listening to those stories. But the second I got the revelation that I was a new creation in Jesus and I trusted him, it was gone and it's never come back.
Amen. That is just such a powerful testimony to everybody, to all of us, to be encouraged that we are new creation in Yeshua, in Christ Jesus, and that he does transform us from deep inside. I'm speaking with Shimshon Chaddock from New Zealand, and we've been talking about his encounter with Yeshua and the conflict that can be for Jewish people. And it can be very confronting for family members. I remember when I grew up, in fact, I was not even a teenager and I was baptized. Our minister at that time was a Jewish man. And when he had the encounter with Yeshua, his family actually held a funeral service for him. And I know that's been a story of, unfortunately, for too many Jewish people. What was your experience? How did your family react when you had this extraordinary change of life, encounter with Yeshua, and your extended family and friends?
Well, I do know quite a few friends who had that experience that you're talking about. I knew some friends that were Orthodox and their families actually kidnapped them and locked them in closets for a week without food and things. My story is a little different, come from a very secular family, but I had also been separated from my family, though I was still living in the States. We lived in different states. But I think their reaction was, oh, here we go again. Now, first it was drugs. Now it was Jesus. And once, when I was a teenager, early 20s, my mother, she had a close friend whose son was a very bad drug addict. And she came to me once and said, maybe you should be like him and get God in your life. And I said, what do you think the people who wrote the Bible were? Those were guys sitting out in the desert eating acid and tripping, and they wrote this book. I don't need the Bible. So actually, I think the reaction was, oh, here we go again. My mother actually said to me years later when she realized how committed I was to God, to Yeshua, she actually said, I wish I would have never said that you should follow God.
Oh.
Because I'd gone too far. But actually, it's 29 years that I really bowed my knee before the Lord. And this year was the first time in my life that my mother said that she was proud of me and the man that I've become.
That's special, isn't it?
First time. So my father, he didn't want to hear nothing. He didn't care about nothing. I tried to talk to him about God, and every time I'd mention, he'd hang up on me. Or I'd get a couple words that we won't say, and then he'd hang up on me. But he'd call me back a week later like it never happened again. And so they just thought it was a phase, but 30 years later, and they see it's not a phase.
So they can see that it's real and it's really changed you, and they're proud of you. And that must have been so special to hear those words.
I couldn't believe when my mother said it. Like I said, even today, I don't cry often. And that kind of brought me to tears, that it only took her 29 years to see that my conversion was real and lasting.
It raises that whole issue, doesn't it, about that whole conflict for Jewish people that have the encounter with Yeshua, recognize him as Messiah within the Jewish culture. That's probably a big issue just in itself. But just for a moment, can you just give our listeners just a little glimpse into the world that it is for Jewish people who do follow Yeshua?
Again, it's going to depend on the family, on the religiosity of each family. Because it's amazing is that just the name of Yeshua rises up things in people who don't even believe God exists. When I moved to Israel, we were actually taught by Zionists that nothing can take away your Jewishness. Nothing. You can believe in the moon, you're a Jew. You can believe in a cow, you're a Jew. You can become a Buddhist, you're a Jew. You can become a Sikh, you're a Jew. But the second you believe that Jesus is the Jewish Messiah, you're no longer a Jew.
Oh.
That's what we were taught in a secular Zionist class. So there's many different challenges on so many different levels. But in my 29 years, it went from Yeshua is an enemy to the Jewish people to where now they're actually proudly saying he was one of us. So the scales are coming off. About 10 years ago, all of a sudden, they wrote an article in Israel, Yeshua huaya talmid tov. Hu chaya talmid tov means he was a good student, is a little translation, but meaning he was a good student of the Torah, a good student of the word. But now he's one of us. He's not our Messiah, but he's one of us. But more and more, the hearts of my people are being open to who their Messiah is.
That is good news, and I've been interviewing a few different people and talking about in the decade that we've been traveling to Israel, we've seen that softness starting to come and that response between Jew and Christian, and that's really a result of prayer. I was going to ask you, what year was it that you had that encounter with Yeshua?
When he came into my room, it was, I believe, February or March 1988. And then I got down on my knees and cried March 1991, because I remember I was given a Bible for my first baptism, which it happened so fast I didn't even know what happened. And I got invited to a Messianic congregation in 1991, and I didn't even know what that was. And it turned out it was like to the week, 3 years later.
Wow. The reason I asked you that was because I know that a lot of prayer for Israel really ramped up around that time. And I know, we started a prayer group for Israel in 1994. And a lot of the prayer, there was two streams. One was to repent of our anti-Semitism and replacement theology, but the other was to pray for the Jewish people's eyes to be opened to Yeshua, for the veil to be lifted. So it's really interesting that what you're sharing is to even the changes, what's been said in Israel.
Well, I want to thank you for that, because over the years I've wondered, people talk about, and they said, well, I had a grandmother who prayed for me, or I had a mother or father or uncle who prayed for me. I don't know of anybody who would have prayed for me to not just become into the kingdom, but someone who's, really laid down his life and followed the Lord throughout the world. Not that I've done more than anybody else, not even close, but I just went from somebody who didn't want to live under a bridge in a cardboard box or spend the rest of my life in prison to traveling the world for him. So I've come a long way, but I have no idea who would have been praying for me. So thank you.
Oh, from our perspective, it's wonderful for people to see and to hear answers to prayer. And so to see in your life and to become a good friend with you and with others that we have, come to know, and to, as we've been in the land, to just see there is answers to prayer. And this is just a really encouragement for the prayer warriors out there who have been praying for Israel for all these years, to see actually God is answering prayer. And that's really powerful. We've got a couple of minutes left with Shimshon, and we've touched on some really major issues here today of, for people coming out of drug addictions and all sorts of things, and for praying for the Jewish people. I'm just going to ask Shimshon to, whatever's on his heart there, and to pray for those that are listening today, because I know that what his testimony is so powerful, and there's so many keys for people. So over to you, Shimshon, to just wrap up and to just pray. Thank you.
For those of you that are driving along and listening to this, and you might, what's the importance of Israel? Well, if you're a Christian and you believe in Jesus, in God, he is the God of Israel. And he has invited you into this end-time battle, into the redemption of the Jewish people, to bring them back into their destiny and into their calling. And if you're wondering, well, why is Israel important? Israel's not important in and of itself, but without God fulfilling his promises to the Jewish people, you can't believe him. You can't trust him. So we're important just to make the point that your God is real and true, and continue to press in, because he is coming, he is returning, and he's going to reclaim and sit upon David's throne in Jerusalem for 1,000 years. So Israel plays a part in the kingdom to come. So it's very key that you would understand. And to those that are just struggling out there with the normal, well, there is no normal anymore. It's a new normal world. But you're dealing with drugs and alcohol and other issues of bondage. I really, really want to give you hope. Jesus said that I am the way, the truth, and the life. And there's but one way to the Father, and that's through me. And you don't know me, you might never meet me. You don't know if I'm telling you the truth or not telling you the truth. But if you try him, and you will see, and you grab a hold of the life vest that he's reaching out to you today. Some of you might be drowning today in your own sin and in your alcoholism and your drug problems. And he's sending you a life vest, a life preserver today. Grab a hold of it, because that is the way to rescue. It is only through him. There are many other ways that seem wise, that will bring wisdom, might even bring you peace, but none everlasting. Now, what I said before, that Jesus, believing in him, following him, trusting him, is the hardest thing you'll ever do. And there's some days, I use the example of the life preserver. There's some days I'm so strong in my faith that I'm like surfing along, just hanging on and having fun. And then there's other days I'm clinging on to that life vest by my pinky. But 29 years, even if I'm holding on by that pinky, I've never let go. So I want to encourage you today to grab a hold and never let go. Avinu sheba shamayim, anachnu ba'im lifnecha. Our Father who art in heaven, who is in heaven, who rules from heaven. I just lift up those listening today, Father. First, those that are following you, who are Christians, Father, who know you, but don't have a revelation of who Israel is to you, Father. I pray that the scales would fall off their eyes, and they would understand the importance of Israel in these days and in these times, Father, and how you love Israel, and you've never forgotten us, and you will not forsake us, and you will keep your promise. But to those that are struggling, Father, I speak life, and I pray life over them now, Father. I pray that they would grab a hold of the life vest that you're reaching out to them, that they would scream, Father. And I remember the story of the disciples on the sea, and the storms were coming, and the boat was tossing and turning in the Sea of Galilee, and they were fearful of their death, but they cried out to you, Father, and you answered them. So I pray that somebody out there, some people out there, would scream out to you, save me, save us, save me, deliver us, Lord. and you would answer them, but not just answer them. They would see it is by your hand, Yeshua, and that they would bow their knees and they would allow you to accept them into your holy presence, that they may walk in all your ways. You would deliver them from the alcoholism, from the drug problems, Father, from the sexual addictions, Father, from porn addictions, from every addictions that there is, Father, that you would break the spiritual bondage of every spirit of addiction this day, Lord, in your most holy name, Yeshua. And I'll pray the Aaronic benediction. It's the Lord told us how to pray over the children of Israel. Yivarecha Adonai v'yishmarecha. Yair Adonai panav alecha v'yichunecha. Yisa Adonai panav alecha v'esim lecha shalom. May Yahweh bless you and keep you. May Yahweh make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. May Yahweh turn his face towards you and grant you his shalom, his eternal shalom. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Shimshon. Thank you so much for sharing your heart with us today. Shimshon is in New Zealand and he's a precious friend. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ruth. It's an honor and blessing to be here.